we'll have more people to join the room as we go. So hey guys, so welcome to AladdinDAO and BanklessDAO co-hosted Boule Research. Yeah, so today we'll have Cody White to present our V3 and its stablecoin Go. So Cody runs trading and investment at CMS, and he has been an Aladdin Boule member from the very beginning. So I personally have learned so much from him throughout the process. So I really, look forward to learn from him on our V3 and this stablecoin project. So I'll pass it to Cody.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlene, for the intro there. I guess I'll just do a quick little intro for myself. I got into crypto sort of around 2016, I think, sort of the early days of like when ETH was really getting its legs. Just sort of in a personal capacity for a couple of years, diving in and pretty much getting addicted at that point. And then in 2018, I joined Circle on the OTC trading desk, and so traded there for a few years before eventually moving over to CMS, where I do trading and venture investing. So pretty much all in on crypto at this stage. Don't see myself ever going back. So. All right, so we'll jump into Ave now. So we're going to go over basically some of their V3 protocols, some of the new features, sort of like what the changes are from V2, and a little bit of their Go stablecoin, which is a little bit in early stages, still going through some governance for the final parameters and things like that. But I think it's going to shape up to be a pretty interesting entrant into the space. So Ave probably needs no introduction, honestly. If especially in the Bankless Discord, I'm sure you guys are very familiar. But just a quick overview of for those who may not be as familiar. Basically, it's a decentralized non-custodial liquidity protocol, money market, borrow and lend protocol, whatever you really want to call it. It's one of these. It's one of the majors, I would say. Effectively, lenders can provide liquidity. They get yield on the assets as people borrow them. There's sort of like a utilization curve that sets the interest rates. And governance is really pivotal in this whole thing on keeping the system working and setting the parameters so that everything is smooth. Another piece of Aave and most lending protocols more generally is they allow for under collateralized lending within one block, so this is what's known as a flash loan. So this is sort of like another piece of lending protocols that you might not think about if you're not looking at it in certain contexts. Otherwise, all borrowing is normally over collateralized. Each market sort of has its own you have to comply with before you can you can loan against your collateral. And Aave is completely open source, audited. It's been around, came out of sort of the early days of Ethereum and the builders sort of building on that. So it's so just a short primer on the Ave token itself. It's a governance token. The Ave token can be staked in what's called the safety This is really well for securing. It could be anything like a hack, a smart contract hack, where something gets drained, you get bad debt from liquidation's not able to be carried out like efficiently, so you have some leftover debt on the books that needs to be shed. You could have something like an Oracle failure, where again that sort of leads to liquidation scenarios that aren't efficient. and then you just have slashed in order to mitigate like shortfall events. The common model for staking and sort of like a lending protocol, but there's other measures to help shortfalls. I'm not going to dive into those because there are quite a few, but effectively the safety module is the primary mechanism for this. And what's sort of interesting is you can lock basically Aave ETH or balancer pool tokens in an 80-20 ratio into the safety module. And what this does is it basically incentivizes liquidity for where there's a shortfall that Aave needs to be liquidated to like raise funds to pay off some debt, etc. Like you have this pool, this deep liquidity pool. Actually being classed with balancer tokens on top of that because they incentivize their pools. And there's these things called basically safety incentives where Aave is issued periodically to incentivize people to stake in the safety module. So onto Aave v3. So v2 has been around for quite a while now. v3 is starting to get its legs, and there's a number of features that sort of make it pretty compelling over v2. I think the v2 Ethereum market is still, I want to say maybe 2/3 of the TVL, but v3, basically all the newer protocols that are getting launched are launched on v3, and the Ethereum market itself, like the mainnet Ethereum market, should be upgraded fairly soon. I don't know exact timeline, but I know that that's ongoing. So some of the major features here for v3, something called isolation mode, high efficiency mode, portals. We're going to go over all these, so I won't list them out too much here. So isolation mode basically is part of a risk mitigation for new markets that can be added. So a lot of times with these lending protocols, listing can be overly conservative because you don't want to add additional risk to the system that like otherwise would, like you would otherwise just not be able to list sort of riskier new tokens until there's like a massive ecosystem built up, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So what this does is it means you can add new assets with isolated collateral. So users can only borrow stablecoins that are like specifically permissioned, and there's a ceiling on the amount of debt that can be issued against these. So it sort of allows like a slow rollout to the protocol. And I think that's really important for, something like Aave, like they're going to be conservative with the things that they add to the protocol as long as it is risking sort of their core protocol, essentially. Like they're not going to add something that's brand new that's going to add a ton of risk and put the whole thing sort of at a massive risk. So this lets them roll out these newer markets without being worried about there being some systemic effect to it. So I think that's a pretty nice way to allow this to grow into the longer tail markets, which otherwise would like be sort of delegated to the like lesser lending protocols, if you will. Like I don't know if you guys remember Cream, which sort of took on in DeFi Summer took on like some of the longer tail lending stuff because they weren't getting listed on Aave and Compound and sort of like the blue chip protocols, if you will. So this lets them sort of compete in that arena and really add on some of the stuff that might not be deemed, and different reasons come up to change parameters. Just allowing the protocol to like not have to have these massive governance votes just to change a tiny little thing, which can be like a really cumbersome thing to get through when people don't want to just be voting on something that they don't necessarily care about or understand, or just things that like people get a little bit like exhausted over governance sometimes. So this is an interesting way to take some of that load off of like governance. Another feature basically relates more to L2 deployments, and it basically just sort of, again, it's a risk management thing for L2s. Like if a sequencer went down, this basically introduces a grace period for liquidations and disables borrowing. Like if a price oracle went down, like because the sequencer like had some downtime or whatever, like again, you can run into shortfall events where if an L2 deployment, the oracle on that is relying on transactions to update prices, but the sequencer is down, so it's not, ordering transactions and rolling them down to L1. So this would sort of take a little bit of that risk off and not have quite as bumpy of a ride in that scenario. Hopefully, it's not a common one, but there's a number of like risks you have to look at when you're deploying across L2s. So this sort of helps with that. Another one here is basically variable liquidation close factor, and this is it relates to sort of efficiency of liquidations. I think previously the max they could liquidate was half of a position at a time, and that was probably done. Well, it was either done because there's some smart contract limitation, or because the liquidity wasn't like large enough for them to think that a whole position to be liquidated. I'm not sure, but basically this allows like when a position is approaching insolvency, which is like a health factor less than 0.95. They can liquidate the whole position. So it's a little bit more flexibility regarding liquidations, so that you don't run into these events where like they can't liquidate things fast enough because they can only do half at a time, and maybe the shortfall wouldn't have happened if they could liquidate in the single block, but since they have to do multiple different waves of it, you end up with a shortfall. So it's basically risk management for more efficient liquidations, which again, not super interesting, but it's really important. And so there's a number of sort of decentralization focused
I didn't realize to
features.
rent an enterprise.
Tradesman, can you mute? Thanks.
Yes, we can hear.
No, sorry, someone had started talking.
Get you to
So next feature sort of relate to decentralizations.
bonds and machine and me to the roots.
This relates to what's called asset listing admins. And so this
That's reasonable.
is a role that can be granted by Ave governance, basically allowing different listing strategies than an on-chain vote. So it's sort of similar to one of the other features we talked to, where it takes a little bit of the responsibility off of governance for listing different assets, and allows like builders to create custom strategies. And again, like think of entity in a really general sense, where it could be a DAO, a smart contract. Like this could sort of be extended in a number of different ways. And again, this would have to be granted by governance. It would go through a long process to allow these asset listing admins to get the permissions. But once that's done, then governance doesn't have to vote on every single thing. So it just makes, again, the ability to list things faster, and just more efficient governance overall, and more compelling use of the protocol, I think. So that's most of the major new features. There's a couple other smaller changes. If you want to learn about those, there's good posts on their governance forum, like going over everything. There's a technical paper if you really want to dive in. But we'll go on to what we know so far about Go, or GHO, their decentralized stablecoin. So this is a fairly recent development with Ave. This was posted, I think, sometime in July last month, on their governance forum, basically like creating a decentralized over collateralized stablecoin, be pegged to USD, just like most other stablecoins in the ecosystem these days, governed by the Ave community. It would be multi-collateral, so basically anything that's a collateral asset on the Ave protocol, in theory, could be used to create these stablecoins, and you would still continue to get yield on what you deposit onto the protocol. So I think it's a pretty interesting entrant into the space. Obviously, stablecoins have been incredibly hot, and there's some really cool ideas coming out about these. But I think the integration of a decentralized stablecoin into an existing protocol with like a massive lending business is really interesting. This starts to look fairly similar to Maker, but I think basically Aave having one of the most robust and most used lending protocol out there is a pretty interesting sort of inception point for a stable coin. So it was the initial governance vote was overwhelmingly yes to go forward with this and sort of continue to spec out how it would look. Basically, a user would supply collateral at a specific ratio to mint go. This would be very similar, I think, in theory, to just depositing something as collateral on the lending protocol and borrowing against it. So I think it would be integrated pretty nicely where it's going to have a nice, like an easy UX like that people are used to. And basically when a user repays that borrow, the go would be burned. And I think one of the really interesting points here, which we'll sort of talk about a little bit, are interest payments would be interest payments that are accrued by people who mint go. So, it'd have a sort of a borrow rate similar to anything else you'd borrow. They're transferred to the Ave DAO treasury. And so this opens up like a massive revenue stream for Aave, I think. It depends on how big the stablecoin gets, but, obviously the Ave DAO treasury gets revenue from the protocol, but this would be like interest payments instead of going to liquidity providers. This would be solely to the Ave DAO treasury, which is a really cool thing. I think it'll be super interesting to look at the revenue numbers when this starts to get going. And so the borrow rates they had in the original post had said would be determined by Ave DAO as like a stable rate that they could change in governance depending on market conditions. There's some pushback here because pegged interest rates can sort of get hairy in different market scenarios. So this is sort of an ongoing debate that you sort of have to stay up with on the forum. I don't know that this is going to be a stable rate to start, though I wouldn't be very surprised if they did a stable rate to start and then started working on some more fleshed out model. But again, the parameters are yet to be set. This has to go through governance, and I think people are chiming in with some really interesting things to say about it. So that piece still definitely up in the air. But important part for now, I guess, is that people who borrow go against collateral on Aave would pay some interest rate, and that would accrue to the Ave DAO treasury. So that's the real takeaway for right now on that. Something I think that gets really interesting down the line is this role of facilitators that they had brought up, which we'll go over in the next slide. But as of now, basically the project's been greenlit, discussion started, and like they're working through what parameters should be. So keep your eye out for more there. So on facilitators, this is basically facilitators would have the ability to generate and burn Go tokens. For now, this would be Aave protocol to start. Like this is sort of something down the line as it gets fleshed out. Entities, people, whatever the case may be, can make a governance proposal to basically launch a facilitator. This could be, a DAO, a protocol, something like real world assets, like protocol. This could be someone who wants to do delta neutral positions or algorithmic generation. So this could be expanded in a number of ways. Again, like really depending on governance, and I assume that the Aave community is going to be really critical of facilitators and make sure that they really have their ducks in a row before they allow anything, like especially super long tail. But it sort of leaves the door open for some really interesting expansion opportunities once things stabilize. The governance would also approve a bucket for each facilitator, which is basically an upper limit on the amount that they can mint. So what's good about that is they can essentially sort of almost trial run certain facilitators with like a low cap that, obviously they want to make sure things are as safe as possible before they truly allow a facilitator. But, I think they can be conservative with what they allow at the start and not let a single facilitator get too massive before the risks are fully known and before it's really proven. So that's, I think, an important part. And as I said, the first facilitator will be the Ave protocol, which was approved in the green light governance post that basically says to like go forward with figuring out the rest of these the parameters and basically allow Ave protocol to be the first facilitator. And that would be sort of the model that we talked about where you deposit collateral assets on the platform and borrow go against it. So that would be sort of the Ave protocol's facilitator role. Just a like little theoretical flowchart of like how this could look with different facilitators doing mint and go with different strategies. And this is, very speculative and early stage. Like none of these other categories are going to be a part of it right away. But it's down the line, you could see. Something I think really interesting about Go here is they've proposed a discount strategy mechanism, which basically lets staked Ave holders get a discount on the borrow rate. So this immediately makes Ave more valuable depending on what you're trying to do. But it's a really interesting piece for Ave holders to be able to get a discount on a borrow for a stablecoin. And as Go is like picked up through the DeFi ecosystem, this just gets more interesting as the demand grows. So there's like some really cool synergies between Go and V3, as we talked about. You can see how they'd be used. Like E mode, you could turn on where basically you could deposit other stablecoins and mint Go like very, very close to 1-to-1. Portals basically let Go be minted on L1 Ethereum with all the security that comes with it, and then easily scale cross chain without having to like incentivize external bridges and that whole thing. And then isolation mode basically lets even newer assets, like riskier things, mint Go, but keep it at a much higher collateral ratio, so that they're not excluded, but they're not sort of in the same pool of more blue chip collateral assets. And we sort of already hit on this, but there's some interesting value cases to the Ave token here. There's a lot of stablecoin borrow across Ave. You get the lower interest rate, and the fees go directly to the treasury. So it can be a pretty big windfall for Ave holders, I think, depending on how big the stablecoin gets. And I think it just makes the protocol like really interesting overall. So yeah, that's pretty much it for presentation. If anyone has questions or comments.
Thank you, Cody. So do we have any question for Cody on RV V3 and the stablecoin?
Hey Cody, I have a question. Can you tell me how you think about stablecoin market? Like, do you think there's room for stable players? Do you see the market evolving in a more, or do you think this is a little bit more winner take all?
I think like especially in the interim, like medium term to even like slightly long term, I think there's definitely room. Like the jury's far from out in my mind, like on a winner. Like I mean obviously DAI is probably what you would call the closest to a winner in the decentralized space, but like there's issues with that. There's criticisms to be made. There's I think it's way too early to call something perfect. So I think it's important to explore other models. And I think what's nice about this is it's going to launch with a pretty simple and stable model, but it could be expanded down the line to some really like interesting other methods to mint this stuff. So yeah, I definitely think there's
Yeah, no. I'm less thinking about thinking. Do you think that we end up with just one in against every other stable coin, or do you see a world where there's multiple equal?
I think honestly there's a good chance that you end up with multiple equal, because I think the biggest thing is that every stablecoin, especially a decentralized one, but I guess a centralized one as well, is they all have different risks involved, and sort of some people are going to feel more comfortable with certain risks over other ones. So I think like to the extent these are built with different models, there's always going to be room for people to want to take certain risks over others. And so I think there's a good chance that it's not a completely winner take all, at least in the medium to like medium long term. But I mean, long term, who knows?
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Thanks. If nobody has another one, I've got another one. Can you tell what kind of collateral it's gonna have, like when you zoom out and look at the big, we've seen recently that there's huge risks on centralized stablecoin. So, is there any sort of what that overall collateral exposure looks like? Is there any centralized possible those can be isolated or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see a world where you get a lot of the collateral being centralized stablecoins, and that's definitely like one of the criticisms that I would highlight, is that like this is where DAI gets a lot of flack these days. Multi-collateral DAI basically is, I don't know, 50%, 55%, something like that, USDC, and sort of that presents a risk case where you have a big concentration into a centralized collateral type. And with this model, I wouldn't really expect to see it totally different. I mean, it very well could. The governance could basically say, cap the amount of centralized stablecoins that can act as collateral. That could be one way that they combat this. But I think you could definitely see a world where a lot of people find it compelling to go against USDC or USDT, and that ends up being like a large part of it. So it could definitely happen, but I think like those in the community who are like looking at this probably want to make a better version. So hopefully that's on their list.
Like, what happens if blacklisted? Like, some chunk of what happens to Ave in that case?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am not really sure. Like, this is sort of a question with DAI as well, where like can they blacklist only a certain subsection, or like I don't really know. Like Ave's a little bit different in that it's like a collateralized like position model versus DAI's vault, so maybe that has a little bit more flexibility with like which pieces could be blacklisted. But I don't know exactly if that's how it would work technically. So yeah, definitely some more research to be done there. And a lot of this is like being brought up in the governance process now as they figure out parameters and final sort of things with this.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks. That was an awesome presentation.
No problem. Thanks for the questions.
Hey, Cody.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I have a quick question for you. Thanks for the presentation, by the way. It's really great, super informative. What do you think are the closest analogs to Go and Aave in terms of other stablecoins? And I guess this is a two-part question. What do you think would be the differentiators or improvements on that analog?
Yeah, good question. I think like right now, I think the closest thing is probably DAI, the way it's set out right now. But my intuition is that they're going to want to differentiate from DAI somewhat significantly. Otherwise, there'll always be like sort of compared to it, which I mean, they might not be able to avoid that regardless. But yeah, I think DAI is probably the closest thing. There's a number of other like sort of more simple collateral backs, but this is going to look more like a multi-collateral DAI, in my opinion. And hopefully, I think the differentiator can be that they can find ways to like limit the amount of centralized collateral backing. They can have more interesting collateral types, like able to back this, especially with like the isolation mode and the other features that they've added. And I think just having sort of like already a robust lending protocol, like as like integrated with this, like sort of makes it inherently more compelling, though DAI has incredible like penetration through the community already, so less of a concern with them there. But like other upstarts that are doing like a more direct DAI model where like yes, tech like sort of it's a lending protocol, but like it's not as generalized as like something like Aave. So I think that's a compelling piece of this, and hopefully like a pretty significant differentiator. Not to mention the Ghost logo is pretty cool, so I think that works.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
No problem.
Do you have any other questions, Cody? And I have a question for you, Cody. Arbiv is putting out a new stablecoin, Go, and Curve is going to put out another one as well, Curve USD. So this is really like taking the stablecoin competition to the next level. So how, can you make some high level comments? How do you see this market and the competitive landscape is going? Do you think this will be a market, with multiple, scalable stablecoins surviving in the future?
Yeah, for sure. Like, admittedly, I don't know that much about the Curve stablecoin yet, or even if there's that much out there about it. But I think it's definitely going to be a competitive landscape. I don't see any reason to think that it wouldn't be competitive. You know what I mean? Like, stablecoins are probably one of the most hot topics of crypto these days. Even reaching into like the likes of like government and things like that. So it's definitely a big topic on most people's minds, and like it can be a really like good opportunity if one makes it, or if like these get to be a certain size. Like they're a massive market. So I think it's going to be competitive. Like I don't think it's going to be like a winner take all for right now. Like I said, I think it's too early to like say that something is 100% better or like fully perfect. But I think like the more thoughtful designs that come out, the better they all get. So I think like it'll be competitive, but I think in the end it's all good, because especially with the ones sort of coming out these days and they're being in like early stages, they can be a little bit more nimble and flexible with their design and sort of tweak it as they go, and look for improvements based on what other protocols are doing and what works. And DAI has been out there for quite a long time and found a model that works pretty well, and it's gotten to a point where it's like no longer can be that nimble. And so that maybe is an opportunity for other players to try out more interesting things and do it differently, because DAI can no longer be like super flexible with that kind of stuff.
I wonder if the future Curve stablecoin will make use of V Curve as like a backing. To me, it would make sense because you have so much value locked up for a predictable amount of
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And so that would be pretty cool. But then they've got to be considering the trade-off here of having, let's say, the 3 pool and some of the other more liquid
Right.
pools because of what just happened with USDC. Yeah. I think, I have no insight into this, but my gut is that if they weren't already looking to curb USDC exposure, they're probably reconsidering that now before proposing. I think
Right.
the last week has really been a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there. It's like it has to be sort of top of mind. And I think like with the people thinking like deeply in this like stablecoin arena, like it was always in the back of people's minds as a risk and something that we should sort of like avoid a big centralized backing, because it ends up being quite a systemic risk. And like it's not to knock USDC in any way. Like they do what they have to do. They're pretty openly like a centralized stablecoin. No one's hiding that. But it's like, and it's proliferated like through DeFi in like massively. So it does present like some systemic risk in a way that, especially if it's used as backing of a stablecoin, that like that stablecoin can very quickly become like under collateralized or like, partially backed like very quickly if the wrong thing happens.
Yeah, I wonder too if Go will end up limiting or just completely eliminating any sort of backing with USDC. With DAI, it just grew, to more than I think it's worth the risk. So my understanding is Maker's going to make. It seems like the community is interested in making that adjustment, although I definitely haven't dug in enough whether there was like some severe pushback. I know Hasu has a pretty good pulse on the community, and he's very involved, and he seemed to indicate publicly on Twitter, and just having read his post, he seemed to indicate that they were definitely going to start to unwind some of that exposure. But Go, the benefit of like now they're able to basically, it's like if DAI could be rebuilt today, even though there's different trade-offs that they'll be making with this.
Right.
So we need this. We need these decentralized stable coins, and
for sure.
I still think the purest play where you are using blue chip decentralized crypto assets that cannot be censored, which is really like ETH is one of the few there. With Go, I don't know if it makes sense to have wrapped Bitcoin backing it in light of all of this.
Yeah,
so
I think
we'll
like
see.
I'd be surprised if they completely like limit it. In fact, like it seems to be the opposite. Like they want it to be a wide range of collateral and sort of like users to have flexibility. But I think they definitely have to like look at it and see what the community like wants it to be, because I think if you let there be like as much centralized collateral as possible, that like people almost naturally gravitate it because it's like the easiest to get and it's like already sort of really proliferated. So I think like there has to be something, like whether it's like a limit, like it's sort of like in an isolation mode type of deal or what, like limit the amount of that can be backing this, because it's definitely a risk, and it's like I think it would gravitate towards that if there's not something done otherwise.
Yeah, this is, I think, a super interesting view of stablecoins. With the implosion of UST, we really saw a lot of the capital either going into USDC or outflows in general, since so much money flowed out of crypto in period. So I think part of it'd be interesting to get your view of how much of the growth on stables we might see in a zero sum gameness where it's just shuffling. So people trying to de-risk from having so much USDC or USDT versus net new inflows into cryptos. Since I think we all anticipate a fair amount of new capital flowing in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think like especially if it's like largely backed by something like USDC or USDT, like that doesn't necessarily like reduce the supply of those in order to mint go, right? It's just sort of like locked up as collateral. So that I think like is almost like it's not necessary. It's like it looks like a net inflow almost just because it doesn't reduce the supply of the collateral there. But if there can be like a lot of other decentralized assets like ETH and maybe people, especially if there can be like staked ETH and different derivatives and things like that, like I think that can be like a big sort of net inflow of stablecoins versus just sort of locking up USDC for it.
Right.
Again, it's
Exactly.
like, who knows if people go that route.
If we have USDC, or if we have Go, if we have DAI, Frax, if they're all basically wrappers on USDC, then all we're really doing is putting kind of a thin veil
Right.
over a centralized coin. So then how do you have something that's really truly de-risk from that? So maybe the curve stable will have that, but I think a lot of it will come down to the way Ave incentivizes USDC specifically. So if they heavily incentivize it, then we're just going to end up with a lot of USDC in Go.
Yeah, it's like, I think, like I said, it's almost like it'll naturally gravitate there just because it'll be more efficient to mint it with USDC and USDT, things that are like in theory stable assets. It'll be more efficient to mint Go. Like you'll have higher loan to values, or you'll have the ability to have higher loan to values if you use like E-mode and things like that. So like I think all things equal, it gravitates toward that. So I think it definitely need to be thoughtful on like the specifics around what you want the backing to be. Or they could totally go the way of like let the users determine the backing like based on market demand. And in that case, I think it's a lot of USDT and USDC. So yeah, I guess gotta stay up with the Ave forum posts and see what people are thinking, because it's sort of evolving right now.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, so we like stablecoin and stablecoin wars. The more fierce it is, the better it is for curve and convex, and the better it is for everything we build for concentrator and clever.
Sure.
So do we have any more questions for Cody? And it's getting to the end of the hour. If we don't have any further questions, we may end the meeting here today. Right. So thank you so much, Cody, for all the insight you shared with us. And thank you, everybody, for your attendance and support. So if there's any further question, you can come to find out Discord or BanklessDAO Discord. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for joining. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Cody.
you.
Thanks, Cody.
Bye.
Great job.
Thanks. Take care, guys.
Thank you, Cody. Bye.
Nice. Thank you.